Good morning. It is Monday, October the 7th, and this is The Drill. Thank you very much. I'm Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States today, because I'm the only one who makes the presumption for the status quo. My podcast is about being a true conservative and using true conservatism to beat the left each and every day. Broadcasting is my calling, and I podcast not in a search for popularity, but because I have something to say. My podcast is made possible by Spreaker.com. It can be heard on iTunes, Spotify, Google, and YouTube. My email address is storytimes@hotmail.com. I'm on Twitter at Ronald Hardgrove and on Facebook at The Drill. My socio-political odyssey began as a conservative Republican. Then I became a card-carrying member of the Libertarian Party, and now I'm a registered independent and true conservative. I was taught by the left how to dress, how to act, and what to take seriously and who to associate with. When I decided to vote Republican, I thought I could act like a liberal but vote conservative and still consider myself a conservative. I was wrong. Whenever I engaged a liberal in debate, I couldn't win. And I couldn't win because I couldn't be taken seriously and because I didn't understand the debate dynamic between left and right. I talked conservative, but I acted left. I used lefty lingo, I dressed like the left, and I engaged in petty vice and associated with people who were engaged in petty vice. People that used drugs, gambled, consorted with prostitutes, stole, and cheated. I failed to recognize that the debate dynamic is between psychology, things that are imaginary, and philosophy, things that are real. And so I didn't realize that the left was trying to manipulate, bully, and intimidate me rather than engage in good faith in an intellectual conversation. It was no wonder that people around me didn't take me seriously. So I realized that defeating the liberals and socialists starts with getting my act together, by not only voting conservative, but by talking, dressing, and acting conservative, by refusing to associate with common criminals and ne'er-do-wells, by being aware of and resisting left-wing counterculture, and by using my intellect to defeat psychological bullying and intimidation. By becoming a true conservative, I will not only win, I will never lose. And the purpose of this broadcast is to share with my audience the lessons I've learned on how to defeat the left every day. Today I will reschool Rush Limbaugh. I will examine the relationship between shaming and private property and between rights and subjectivism. I will reread the preface of the book, The Culture of Narcissism, American Culture in the Age of Diminishing Expectations, and I will read the conclusion to the book, A False Kind of Christianity by Dan Jensen when I come back. Thank you. On October 3rd of this year, Rush Limbaugh again tried to answer the question, what should we do? I was able to record a clip of the segment. Here it is.
It all, to me, comes down to, you ask me, well then why does this stuff matter to you if nothing can be done about it? Because I think, ultimately, the way things are going to happen is by winning elections. And I had somebody call and ask me a couple of weeks ago, what do we do with what we learned listening to you? What do we do with it after you've taught us or told us about it and we believe? What do we do with it? I said, you do what I do. Tell other people. The objective here is to inform as many millions of Americans as possible for the purposes of winning elections. That is how we have input. That is how we exert control. That is how we do whatever we can to assure that there's accountability for these people. We don't work in the Senate. We don't run committees. We're not lawyers there. We're not part of that establishment. So we can't do what we think they ought to do. All we can do, and it's not all, it's a powerful thing, is keep winning elections and outnumber them. Elections have consequences. You realize none of this had been going on if the Republicans had kept the House. Elections have consequences, folks. It's what ticked me off about so many damn Republicans retiring. 55 of them retired. Going into the 2018 midterms. Why? Well, the excuse was, well, they're losing their committee chairmanships and they don't want to go back to just being an average member. Fine. So you quit and you basically turned the House over to the Democrats. It was predictable this was what was going to happen. If the Republicans had busted their ass like Trump did and tried to hold on to the House, this wouldn't be going on today right now. Well, I take it back. It would be going on, but only in the media. There wouldn't be any impeachment garbage going on right now. And this impeachment isn't real. This is just a 2020 campaign tactic. This is not a real impeachment. There are no subpoenas. Nobody is compelled and forced to go up to Schiff's committee and talk. They're even doing it in private. That's why they chose the Intel committee, so they can do it in private. They don't have anything. They don't have any impeachable offenses. They're working behind closed doors to continue to make stuff up. And they pass it off to their buddies in the media. The reason this is happening is because we lost the House.
So, Mr. Limbaugh is wrong. He's wrong. He again makes the assumption that reality should be subordinated to politics. No, it's the other way around. His advice to talk to people is also wrong. He assumes that the job of conservatives is to proselytize. He thinks that the only reason conservatives don't win more political contests is because we lack numbers, and with enough people we will elect majorities in the House and Senate and re-elect presidents, and that all of these office holders will craft legislation to fix our broken culture. We have plenty of voters and donors. The problem is that they're demoralized. They've been convinced by the left-wing counterculture that they can't win. In order to win the political war, we have to learn how to defeat the socialists in our lives, our parents, siblings, children, co-workers, fellow parishioners. If we started winning every argument every day, we will turn things around. We will regain confidence while demoralizing our opponents. We will swell the voting rolls and politically swamp the left. When I come back, I'm going to examine the link between shaming and property rights and subjectivism. Thank you. Welcome back. Shaming and property rights. At first glance, there would seem to be no relationship between these two concepts, but a closer inspection reveals what the left is up to. First, the left is always trying to get in your psyche. They have to use subtle and nuanced methods in order to succeed. The left is always trying to get us to quit shaming. They command, don't judge. And at first glance, this appears to be sound advice. But the left is not trying to create a kinder and gentler society, but is simply being destructive. They want to destroy private property. In order to destroy private property, they need to destroy any expectation of privacy. Why is it that we expect privacy? To avoid constant judgment and shame. If there is no judgment and shame, then there will be no expectation of privacy, and hence no need for private property or property rights. In the case of rights and subjectivism, the left invents rights for the individual and uses subjectivism as its basis for doing so. If subjectivism were true, then every person would be an island and individuals would have nothing in common, including rights. All claims of rights would have to be asserted individually. If the left wants to claim that a person who identifies as female has the right to use a female restroom and gender therefore becomes a matter of identity rather than reality, then no one else will have any reason to object. When I return, I'm going to read the preface to the book, The Culture of Narcissism, American Culture in an Age of Diminishing Expectations. Thank you. And now I will read the book, the preface to the book, The Culture of Narcissism, and it's The Culture of Narcissism, American Culture in the Age of Diminishing Expectation. Hardly more than a quarter century after Henry Luce proclaimed the American century, American confidence has fallen to a low ebb. Those who recently dreamed of world power now despair of governing the city of New York. Defeat in Vietnam, economic stagnation, and the impending exhaustion of natural resources have produced a mood of pessimism in higher circles, which spreads through the rest of society as people lose faith in their leaders. The same crisis of confidence grips other capitalist countries as well. In Europe, the growing strength of communist parties, the revival of fascist movements, and a wave of terrorism all testify in different ways to the weakness of established regimes and to the exhaustion of established tradition. Even Canada, long a bastion of stolid bourgeoisie dependability, now faces in the separatist movement in Quebec a threat to its very existence as a nation. The international dimensions of the current malaise indicate that it cannot be attributed to an American failure of nerve. Bourgeoisie society seems everywhere to have used up its store of constructive ideas. It has lost both the capacity and the will to confront the difficulties that threaten to overwhelm it. The political crisis of capitalism reflects a general crisis of Western culture, which reveals itself in a pervasive despair of understanding the course of modern history or of subjecting it to rational direction. Liberalism, the political theory of the ascendant bourgeoisie, long ago lost the capacity to explain events in the world of the welfare state and the multinational corporation. Nothing has taken its place. Politically bankrupt, liberalism is intellectually bankrupt as well. The sciences it has fostered, once confident of their ability to dispel the darkness of the ages, no longer provide satisfactory explanations of the phenomena they profess to elucidate. Neoclassical economic theory cannot explain the coexistence of unemployment and inflation. Sociology retreats from the attempt to outline a general theory of modern society. Academic psychology retreats from the challenge of Freud into the measurement of trivia. The natural sciences, having made exaggerated claims for themselves, now hasten to announce that science offers no miracle cures for social problems. In the humanities, demoralization has reached the point of a general admission that humanistic study has nothing to contribute to an understanding of the modern world. Philosophers no longer explain the nature of things or pretend to tell us how to live. Students of literature treat the text not as a representation of the real world, but as a reflection of the artist's inner state of mind. Historians admit to a, quote, sense of the irrelevance of history, unquote, in David Donald's words, quote, and of the bleakness of the new era we are entering, unquote. Because liberal culture has always depended so heavily on the study of history, the collapse of that culture finds an especially poignant illustration in the collapse of historical faith, which formerly surrounded the record of public events with an aura of moral dignity, patriotism, and political optimism. Historians in the past assumed that men learned from their previous mistakes. Now that the future appears troubled and uncertain, the past appears irrelevant, even to those who devote their lives investigating it. Quote, the age of abundance has ended, unquote, Donald writes. Quote, the lessons taught by the American past are today not merely irrelevant, but dangerous. Perhaps my most useful function would be to disenthrall students from the spell of history, to help them see the irrelevance of the past, to remind them to what a limited extent humans control their own destiny, unquote. Such is the view from the top, the despairing view of the future now widely shared by those who govern society, shape public opinion, and supervise the scientific knowledge on which society depends. If, on the other hand, we ask what the common man thinks about his prospects, we find plenty of evidence to confirm the impression that the modern world faces the future without hope. But we also find another side of the picture, which qualifies that impression and suggests that Western civilization may yet generate the moral resources to transcend its present crisis. A pervasive distrust of those in power has made society increasingly difficult to govern, as the governing class repeatedly complains without understanding its own contribution to the difficulty. But this same distrust may furnish the basis of a new capacity for self-government, which would end by doing away with the need that gives rise to a governing class in the first place. What looks to political scientists like voter apathy may represent a healthy skepticism about a political system in which public lying has become endemic and routine. A distrust of experts may help to diminish the dependence on experts that has crippled the capacity for self-help. Modern bureaucracy has undermined earlier traditions of local action, the revival and extension of which holds out the only hope that a decent society will emerge from the wreckage of capitalism. The inadequacy of solutions dictated from above now forces people to invent solutions from below. Disenchantment with government bureaucracies has begun to extend to corporate bureaucracies as well, the real centers of power in contemporary society. In small towns and crowded urban neighborhoods, even in suburbs, men and women have initiated modest experiments in cooperation designed to defend their rights against the corporations and the state. The, quote, flight from politics, unquote, as it appears to the managerial and political elite, may signify the citizens' growing unwillingness to take part in the political system as a consumer of prefabricated spectacles. It may signify, in other words, not a retreat from politics at all, but the beginnings of a general political revolt. Much could be written about the signs of new life in the United States. This book, however, describes a way of life that is dying, the culture of competitive individualism, which in its decadence has carried the logic of individualism in the extreme of a war of all against all, the pursuit of happiness to the dead end of a narcissistic preoccupation with the self. Strategies of narcissistic survival now present themselves as emancipation from the repressive conditions of the past, thus giving rise to a cultural revolution that reproduces the worst features of the collapsing civilization it claims to criticize. Cultural radicalism has become so fashionable and so pernicious in the support it unwittingly provides for the status quo that any criticism of contemporary society that hopes to get beneath the surface has to criticize at the same time much of what currently goes under the name of radicalism. Events have rendered liberationist critiques of modern society hopelessly out of date, and much of the early Marxist critique as well. Many radicals still direct their indignation against the authoritarian family, repressive sexual morality, literary censorship, the work ethic, and other foundations of bourgeois order that have been weakened or destroyed by advanced capitalism itself. These radicals do not see that the authoritarian personality no longer represents the prototype of the economic man. Economic man himself has given way to the psychological man of our time, the final product of bourgeoisie or bourgeois individualism. The new narcissist is haunted not by guilt, but by anxiety. He seeks not to inflict his own certainties on others, but to find a meaning in life. Liberated from the superstitions of the past, he doubts even the reality of his own existence. Superficially relaxed and tolerant, he finds little use for dogmas of racial and ethnic purity, but at the same time forfeits the security of group loyalties and regards everyone as a rival for the favors conferred by a paternalistic state. His sexual attitudes are permissive rather than puritanical, even though his emancipation from ancient taboos brings him no sexual peace. Fiercely competitive in his demand for approval and acclaim, he distrusts competition because he associates it unconsciously with an unbridled urge to destroy. Hence, he repudiates the competitive ideologies that flourished at an earlier stage of capitalist development and distrusts even their limited expression in sports and games. He extols cooperation and teamwork while harboring deeply antisocial impulses. He praises respect for rules and regulations in the secret belief that they do not apply to himself. Acquisitive in the sense that his cravings have no limits, he does not accumulate goods and provisions against the future in the manner of the acquisitive individualist of 19th century political economy, but demands immediate gratification and lives in a state of restless, perpetually unsatisfied desire. The narcissist has no interest in the future because, in part, he has so little interest in the past. He finds it difficult to internalize happy associations or to create a store of loving memories with which to face the latter part of his life, which under the best of conditions always brings sadness and pain. In a narcissistic society, a society that gives increasing prominence and encouragement to narcissistic traits, the cultural devaluation of the past reflects not only the poverty of the prevailing ideologies, which have lost their grip on reality and abandoned the attempt to master it, but the poverty of the narcissist's inner life. A society that's made nostalgia a marketable commodity on the cultural exchange quickly. A society that has made nostalgia a marketable commodity on the cultural exchange quickly repudiates the suggestion that life in the past was in any important way better than life today. Having trivialized the past by equating it with outmoded styles of consumption, discarded fashions, and attitudes, people today resent anyone who draws on the past in serious discussions of contemporary conditions or attempts to use the past as a standard by which to judge the present. Current critical dogma equates every such reference to the past as itself an expression of nostalgia. As Albert Parr has observed, this kind of reasoning, quote, rules out entirely any insights gained and any values arrived at by personal experience, since such experiences are always located in the past and therefore in the precincts of nostalgia. To discuss the complexity of our relation to the past, under the heading of nostalgia, substitutes sloganeering for the objective social criticism with which this attitude tries to associate itself. The fashionable sneer that automatically greets every loving recollection of the past attempts to exploit the prejudices of a pseudo-progressive society on behalf of the status quo. But we now know, thanks to the work of Christopher Hill, E.P. Thompson, and other historians, that many radical movements in the past have drawn strength and sustenance from the myth or memory of a golden age in the still more distant past. This historical discovery reinforces the psychoanalytic insight that loving memories constitute an indispensable psychological resource in maturity, and that those who cannot fall back on the memory of loving relations in the past suffer terrible torments as a result. The belief that in some ways the past was a happier time by no means rests on a sentimental illusion, nor does it lead to a backward-looking reactionary paralysis of the political will. And that concludes this section of the preface of the book, The Culture of Narcissism, American Culture in the Age of Diminishing Expectations. When I come back, I will read the conclusion to A False Kind of Christianity, a Conservative Evangelical Refutation of Progressive Christianity. Thank you. And when I left off yesterday, I had completed Chapter 4, the philosophy, section on philosophy, and now I'm going to go ahead and read the conclusion to the book. A final word to PC folks. To PC, which is progressive Christian. To progressive Christian folks, I'm very open to dialogue, but I've been so firm in this book precisely because I have found for the most part, not found progressive Christian adherents open to dialogue, despite their repeated assertions that they're all about dialogue. I usually only receive silence, disdain, or challenges to simply stop being so bigoted. This is not dialogue, it's absolutism. If anyone wants to fire back by saying that clearly I have my dogmas and I am very firm about them, and so I am not being terribly hypocritical, I would have to vehemently respond by saying that no, I really am not. The difference is that I am willing to put all my beliefs out there for examination and scrutiny. I demand assent from no one, but only seek to defend the truth as best as I am able. To say that one has to believe something simply because another says so is the very epitome of dogmatism and absolutism, and I've been met with this approach time and time and time again when discussing with PC followers and leaders. Importance of this subject. One of the most frustrating things I'm confronted with as a Christian teacher, theologian, and apologist is that almost all works from a Christian or conservative evangelical perspective on false religions that claim to be Christian say almost nothing about liberal Protestantism. Most discuss liberal theology as if it is simply a problem within the church to be dealt with purely internally. Therefore, the average conservative evangelical follower usually knows about Mormonism, the Jehovah's Witnesses, and Christian Science, and that they are out of bounds, although even this is sadly changing, as I mentioned earlier in this work. But I have repeatedly found that most within the conservative evangelicalism are fairly aware of liberal politics while being largely ignorant of just how powerful liberal theology is and has been. I've already given a basic history of liberal Protestantism that should help people to see what a travesty this reality is. And I could pump out all kinds of statistics to reinforce this. But allow me to put the focus upon one area to help put things in perspective. Liberal Protestantism, or mainline Protestantism, makes up about 15% of the U.S. population. I've already stated that within this body, a great number of people are true Christians and should be categorized as being within the conservative evangelical, or at least something very similar, and they often are. Coming up with a concrete number for how many within this category are truly liberal Protestants is difficult because of this confusion. However, a very conservative estimate would be about 10% of the U.S. population. Of the U.S. population is genuinely liberal Protestant. Mormonism does not even make up 2% of the U.S. population, and the Jehovah's Witnesses and Christian Scientists combined probably do not even make up a full 2% of the U.S. population. Also, 1/3 of the U.S. Mormon population is limited to the state of Utah. Therefore, the liberal Protestantism population in the United States is at least double all three of these religions combined. Liberal Protestantism is the third largest religious movement in the United States behind conservative evangelicalism and Roman Catholicism. And it is the fourth largest worldview in the United States behind the two just mentioned and the unaffiliated, which is second behind Christian evangelicalism. Now, it is true that the liberal Protestantism has seen a drastic decline since the 60s, as has already been described earlier in this work, and even in the last 10 years, it has seen more decline than any other religious or worldview group in our country. However, there's no reason to become complacent, as this is simply a natural phenomenon within liberal Protestantism, as was also described earlier in this work. The idea that liberal Protestantism cannot have phases of resurgence despite this natural tendency is ridiculous, and the late success of progressive Christianity may signal that we are on the precipice of this very danger. Worldwide estimates are even more difficult, as most sociologists simply lump all Protestants together, which is terribly unfortunate and historical nonsense. But a conservative estimate would be that liberals' adherents make up anywhere from 200 to 300 million people worldwide. It is the sixth largest religious movement in the world behind Islam, Roman Catholicism, Hinduism, Buddhism, and Christian evangelicalism. And it is the seventh largest worldview in the world behind Islam, Roman Catholicism, Hinduism, the unaffiliated, Buddhism, and Christian conservative evangelicalism. Mormonism, the Jehovah's Witnesses, and Christian Science are all radically dwarfed by all these movements worldwide, including liberal Protestantism. Not only should these members speak for themselves, but things are much worse than only the numbers, because conservative evangelical followers historically have always been most influenced by two of these worldviews, the unaffiliated and the liberals. And today in both America and worldwide, no group within the liberals is more passionate and successful in converting conservative disciples than progressives, especially amongst young American conservative followers. To ignore or downplay this movement is sin, plain and simple. Final thoughts. The greatest weakness of this book has been the fact that, given my target audience, I've had to leave so much out and greatly simplify so much as well. At almost every point, I wanted to write more in order to greater clarify things, but I had to force myself not to. Given the stated purposes for this work, I beg the reader to contact me at my email address and ask me any necessary questions for clarification. Also, if anyone within the progressive community is tempted to say that I talk a big game, but that I fail to directly address a lot of arguments and leaders from progressivism, I would respond by saying that anyone is welcome to send me an email and request that I directly respond to any progressive doctrine argument, or leader, and I will happily do so. I would also be more than willing to engage in a formal debate with any progressive leader. Again, simply contact me at my email address to make the request, and I'm game. It is my hope that God has been honored through this book and that it is genuinely not pious lip service. To him be all the glory. Amen. And that was the conclusion of A False Kind of Christianity, a conservative evangelical refutation of progressive Christianity. So it is an important book because it talks about the influence that the left has and is attempting to have over one of the most important aspects of American culture, namely the church. And it is an area that I don't think most people realize. A lot of times when you're talking to people that are giving you advice, Christian advice, and it sounds odd. You get somebody that tells you, well, you got to do this, or this is the way Jesus would do things, and for some reason it doesn't sound quite right. It's probably because they're a progressive Christian or a liberal Protestant. And so they're giving you not the Bible, they're not giving you true Christian doctrine, but their socio-political spin on Christian doctrine. So, back in a minute. Thank you. In conclusion, I have reschooled Rush Limbaugh on what it is that we should be doing and explained the link between shaming and property rights and rights and subjectivism, and read the preface to the book, The Culture of Narcissism, American Culture in an Age of Diminishing Expectations, and read the conclusion of A False Kind of Christianity, a Conservative Evangelical Refutation of Progressive Christianity by Dan Jensen. Who is the true conservative? He's the person that understands that conservatism is not just about politics, but culture as well. He acts like an adult. He's patriotic and uses common sense. He expresses what he knows and does so with absolute certainty. He makes judgments, refuses to speculate, speaks clearly and definitively, and is not afraid to say no. He's open-minded, asking why rather than why not. He is consistent, credible, and influential, not ashamed of his existence, unafraid to learn or correct his mistakes. He is a normal American and is better than the socialist. He's a better friend, father, brother, family member, and a better person, period. And that brings me to the conclusion of another episode of The Drill. Remember that the left has no authority, no power, and they can't win. True conservatives will never join their movement, and we won't shut up. Thank you for listening, and have a great day.